welcome. I'm really excited to have Sara and Helen here on this podcast. A little bit of an introduction as well. So I've known Helen for a little while, but just a background. Helen had a corporate life up until 2014, and then migrated across to Wild Fig Solutions as a leadership coach, and then has had a journey then in terms of deepening, which we'll dive into, I'm sure, now, in terms of what she's now sharing and offering, which is around awakening and enlightenment. And in particular, I know you're really passionate about working with people that are already on the journey and how they can be let's say stabilized, established in that recognition, in that knowing. And then Sara, really excited to meet you and talk to you. So you've been working with living life sideways. Love that as a name too. And are a writer, a teacher and coach, and love this sort of sharing and understanding of life, the universe, and everything. And so, I know you had 2019, you released a book of non-dual poetry called Quintessence. And both of you have co-authored a new book, which was out last month, The Complete Book of Awakening. So looking forward to talking about that with the two of you. Yeah.
Thanks, James. Lovely intro.
Yeah, let's start off with a nice open. So what does awakening mean to you? I know you talked about that in the intro and give it a really lovely wrapper and unpacking. But just share a little bit about that for people in terms of, we'll have people that are not familiar with that understanding or approach. And just before you answer the question, what I really loved about how you've written this book is to make it practical and accessible, to provide a pathway for people to come in to start to explore this in a very practical, experiential way. But what does it mean to you? Yeah, I'm starting with Sara. What does that mean in terms of awakening to you?
And at its basis, awakening is seeing reality as it is. But I think on top of that, I want to add sort of to know that you're seeing reality as it is, as opposed to obliviously or ignorantly doing it, because it feels to me like awakening is the key to a happy, engaged, functional, stable life, regardless of what's going on. It's a way of knowingly staying at the center of life, and a way of not being shaken by what's going on, but being fully present. And so to me, it feels it's kind of foundational. And I think it's something that is there for every adult, to be honest. It's every adult not in crisis, it's there for. It's the beginning, it's not the end. And that's why we've made the book, I think, so practical and non-religious. It belongs, it's the foundation of every religious tradition, every spiritual tradition, every self-help tradition. And we're not trying to take any of that away from anyone. We're kind of saying your unique expression will show up the way it does, whether that's in a corporate environment or a lovely retreat center or anything in between. It doesn't matter how it shows up in terms of, for us, because we're not prescribing it. What matters is that you start from this really wonderful awakened place of knowing who you are and knowing how that shows up in the world.
Yeah, I love that, the phrase that you used there, Sara, that regardless of what's happening in your experience. I think that for me is so huge, because so to me, and I think we've written this in the book, that awakening as the recognition of your essential nature, to me is the crux of it. Because we can talk about knowing who you really are, but I think so quickly that becomes ideas of personality or traits or habits or preferences. And we're really inviting everyone to step back from all of that to see what really, really is essential or foundational, like Sarah just used that word as well, because then it is that's the stability. So where Sarah's then saying that, you know, that feeling of being grounded and being okay regardless of what's happening in life, which doesn't mean you're distant from it. It doesn't mean oh, I'm so above that now. It's in fact the opposite. You're so close in with it, you're so intimate, you're so present with it, that you're in that fullness. But because you know who you really are, you can be. It's the fear drops, the need to protect or defend who I thought I was has disappeared, because now I know who I really am, who I essentially am. So that, yeah, that to me is the core of awakening.
And Helen, share from your journey of coming to that recognition. That would be really good to hear from your own examples, in terms of to provide some examples and context around that, in terms of what that looked like for you and what shifted.
So I had an awakening in 2018 when I was working with a coach, Piers Thurston. Only about a month into working with him, he'd shaken my conceptual mind so much that it was completely disrupted, and I was feeling like I have no idea what's going on now. I have no idea what reality is, or what's happened in my life. Is it true? Is it not? It was, you know, it was a big old shaking of the tree, which was great because it led to a spontaneous realization of a whole bunch of self-created stories that I'd been keeping telling myself about me and about my family and about my background, and how, oh, of course I'm going to feel like this because of X, Y, and Z, and realizing none of it was true. And it was a complete collapse. I was in the shower, this realization happened, that it was like the Jenga pile of thought collapsed. And yes, there was this big like surge of energy actually coming up and out of my throat. You know, when you're about to cry and you can feel it in your throat, it's like that kind of lump in the throat thing. And then there were tears, but there was delight, and it was quite incredible. And I spent a good few days walking around like a Cheshire cat, and had a good few months of a quiet mind, which was very beautiful. So I'd clearly been in contact there with my very directly in contact with my essential nature, and the beauty of it was in such stark contrast to how my life had been before. But then what happened, and how we met each other, James, the mind came back in again. So the thought chatter came back in again. And I had this sense that it wasn't enough to just say, well, it's not true, it's not true, it's not true. That it felt like that's not quite getting to it. And that's when I began working with Claire Diamond, which is obviously where we met in her courses, and we both did a mastermind with her for a year, didn't we, in separate groups, but at the same time. And so that to me was a really important part of actually what we would term enlightenment. That was an important part for me of clearing up these psychological confusions of how I think I need to be, or how I think others need to be, or what I'm afraid of. So it was looking really directly and honestly at all of that, which was messy in places, again, tears and some upset, and really having to turn the mirror around and say, oh wow, oh, it's not about them, that's me, that's my projection, that's my psychological conditioning creating that experience. So it takes courage to do this. It takes courage to look at that stuff. And then the benefit for me of that was having enlightened from a whole bunch of that psychological stuff. I then felt I want to find my own way with this. Although Piers and Claire's were my primary people through that first stage, I'd also in the meantime been looking at loads of different teachers and coaches in YouTube and podcasts and articles, and I was quite frankly obsessed. It's like my whole life was consumption of content around this stuff, while brushing my teeth, while driving the kids, not driving them to school because they would complain, driving home from school drop off. Any moment it was like, quick, put a podcast on, put a YouTube on, get more. I just could not get enough of it. But then so I came to the end of 2020 and really felt, well, I want to find my own way. I want to find my own voice, my own way of talking about this. And that's where, again, we had another connection, James, because that's when I began working with Ramaji in the US to receive energy transmissions. And in fact, it was a question he asked of, what do you know for yourself? Which was an instigator for the book. Because when he asked that question, I realized, gosh, I don't really know what I know versus what I've picked up from other people. I don't know what I've learned as opposed to what I genuinely know for myself. So it was an incredibly powerful question, and one which, you know, he gave me some pointers similar to the kind of ones that we share in the book. But it was, yeah, so that had a huge impact on me, plus of course the energy transmissions that he offers, to dissolve that core fear of believing I'm a separate self, of believing I'm a separate person, which is the primary veil, I guess, that stops us seeing that we are already awake and already okay and already ourself. So and so yes, it was towards the end of that process then that there was that real clarity of that distinction between awakening and enlightenment, and the real depth of knowing for myself who I really am, the sort of the what felt like a really full and complete knowing of the awakeness that we are and that we always have been. So yes, you said earlier in your introduction, James, that deepening, and I guess for me over that 4 years, it was an amazing initial awakening, but not really knowing what was going on. It just felt really nice, and then deepening and deepening and deepening, clarifying, looking at it from all different angles, all different perspectives. I've always had this eclectic kind of theme to my work until, yeah, reaching where we are today.
And just giving some texture and talking a little, Helen, around the qualities of that your being, your essential nature. What did you notice from that the first knowing, the first revealing to now?
Yeah, so that first one, initially the first few days after, it was like ecstatic. It was delight. It was, oh my God, everything's beautiful and everyone's beautiful and it's all amazing. And I remember just people smiling at me all the time, but clearly because I was walking around in a very smiley state of mind. And then it became just more, there was a sense of peace and flow, like everything just seemed very, yeah, easy and obvious, and a confidence, a kind of, yeah, there was a no holds barred kind of sense. And then as the mind came back in, that got covered over again. But then in the latter stages, I would say it's then been increasingly just this sense of okayness. And in fact, that was one of the core things I remember saying after that initial awakening. I knew deep in my bones, I'm okay. In fact, that was what I was saying while I sobbed in the shower. I was over and over again, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. But in like this, like really deep knowing, oh my God. And so that okayness never really ever left from that initial point, but the knowing of it deepened and deepened. And that for me has been the consistent quality throughout that time. But I'd also add in now that sense of peace, calm. Yeah, that just okayness, really deep okayness. It's lovely. You feel you're held in it, you rest in it. There's no need to find anything else.
Yeah, beautiful. And Sarah, yeah, I was just in terms of what's been your journey of call it waking up, in terms of recognizing your essential nature and how that's then expressed in how you show up and what you share.
You see, I guess I'm unusual in some ways in terms of this community, because whilst I think everybody's born into being awakened, you know, if you ask little kids big questions about the nature of the universe, they tend to have really great answers, and we train them out of them. over time. And so it's kind of normal in that tween phase to sort of fall out of a basic fundamental happiness, to the extent that later on you never really think you had it, or you think it's something special to kids. But for whatever reason, just the phase of my life and what was going on, the environment being quite a big factor for people, obviously, it didn't happen that way. So I grew up honestly believing, like, oh, here I am, kind of average looks, average height, average intelligence, average happiness. And I was in my 40s before I realized what I called average happiness was like way in excess of normal. I genuinely just thought, oh, there you go, just a bit below average. I also found out I'm a bit above average height as well, but it took me a while to appreciate that too. So what, in terms of awakening journey for me, what actually happened was, it was an intellectual awakening. It was oh, that's why, as opposed to like an emotional shift or a big spiritual shift. It was like, oh, well, that explains it. Oh, of course, that makes sense. Kind of. So I followed some of the more intellectual teachers, because I wanted my mind to understand what I already knew. Because every time in life where I'd followed what I knew, things had kind of gone better for me, even in quite really what other people might call really toxic or traumatic situations. I'd navigated them really gracefully, including my now husband broke his neck 4 weeks before we were meant to get married. And nobody could understand why the two of us were so calm and graceful about the whole thing, and nor could we. But we just were. When my appendix perforated and nobody knew what was happening and they were all pretty sure I was going to die, I didn't mind. I was having a lovely time because my blood was so poisoned. I had no idea what was going on. We were really calm, to the point that the surgeon actually said to my husband, "You're very, very calm." And he said, "I can panic if it would help." So we've always been like that, both of us. I just bring those up not to say like, oh, poor me, anything, but just, it's not that life hasn't happened. It's just that we've both naturally, for whatever reason, come through it that way. But I'm a sort of but why person. You know, if you tell me not to touch a sharp knife, I'll touch it 3 times and then have to go to the doctor to have my finger sewn back on. Like, that's just my natural way of doing things. So I wanted to know, but why? And so as I came sort of through the, bodywork, self-help, coaching, and into the more non-dual teaching, I was like, oh, well, this explains it. I don't need to understand anymore. This is the reason. This is how it works. This is what makes sense. And so it was very much my mind coming into alignment. And I think that's one thing a few people talk about now, is the awakened mind. It's not that we're trying to get away from the mind or condemn it, but what we're really getting away from is that mental inner critic, or the mental over-organizer. And I certainly had some of that going on. And I used to have spares of toothpaste or tin tomatoes, not because of any deliberate prepping mentality, but just, well, what would happen if that ran out? So there's things like that where my mind wasn't always in alignment with what I knew. And I think that journey over the last almost 20 years, I guess, has been that journey. So it's different, but no less valuable.
Yeah, love that. Just you sharing around fundamental happiness at the very beginning of what you shared, in terms of that being fundamental. I said it's interesting, isn't it, is how most of the world is still in that view of happiness as something that's external. It's outside, that they need to seek and find and overlook that it's something that's so fundamental, but it becomes veiled, it becomes shrouded with experience, with the conditioning, with the patterning. I actually, that was one thing that's been interesting. I love in the book. I've been really enjoying your book, as well as, was that you talk about this sort of deconditioning process the sort of the slow melting, removing, revealing of our nature, about that fundamental nature. Tell me about how you came together in terms of that and sort of said, all right, we're going to create this book, and it's going to be it's not just going to be the little book, which I know you started thinking this will be a little book. It's now a complete book, and it is. So tell me a little bit about that first, and then I'd love to talk about your approach around that as well. How did that happen? How did you decide, okay, let's co-create this, and that process of how was that?
Yeah, so I mentioned before, James, with Ramaji's question of what do you know for yourself, being quite an instigator for me for my own exploration of checking, what is that? What can I definitely, assuredly say I really know for myself? And he, as I say, he gave me some opportunities to test that, some practical explorations, the kind of like we share in the book. And then this idea came of, well, we need a whole book of this. Like, the world needs a whole book of this. I would have loved a whole book of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized how over the years, over that really intense 4 years that have passed recently, I realized I'd collected bits and pieces along the way. So different teachers, different coaches had given me little, like one experiment or exploration here or there. I'd maybe got some from books, or just various places where I realized they were all dotted around. It's like, wow, imagine if we had one book that actually guided somebody from beginning to, I say inverted commas, end, because really to me there is no end, but one little book, like you say, which it did seem like it was going to be at the time, that would give people these practical explorations and have them know for themselves, because I'd felt the impact of that myself, of the difference of that assuredness or sure-footedness. I think we also talk about in the book, oh no, really, like I really get it. I'm not at all relying on somebody else's words or perspective or opinion. Oh no, I really know it for myself. So that was the primary aim, and really, as Sarah said before about coming away from religious dogma or spiritual dogma, I was really passionate. I've had that phrase, practical spirituality, seems to have meant a lot to me in the last 2-3 years, and so it was really important to me that it was a practical book that was accessible for everybody, that it's not shrouded in mystery or requiring you to be of some certain understanding or religion. This is true of everybody and for everybody. So I'd already had the broad outline. I think I'd started collecting together some of these experiments into one place, and then I went on a webinar that Sarah was hosting, because Sarah had been pandemic and all that kind of stuff, and Sarah had just come out doing a couple of free webinars. I was like, I'll go and see what Sarah's up to, go and join this and just see what's happening in her world. And I was like, oh, she's offering the exact kind of experiments here that I've been collecting and I really want to be part of this book. So so I dropped Sarah a message afterwards and said, well, how do you fancy doing this book together? So over to you, Sarah.
And empowering people to understand for themselves how they got to their awakening, to give people the ability that when life does throw curveballs at them, that they've got something to fall back on, not just a feeling that may well be a long way in the background in certain situations. So it feels to me like it's probably a brilliant business model to not give people power to explore for themselves, but it's not a great stable awakening model for long term, because we don't want people to stay clients forever. We kind of want them to do their exploration, certainly not in this awakening level. We want them to do that, and if ongoing evolution is happening, then I have worked with people for several years now in terms of not even enlightenment anymore, but some kind of expansion experience. But awakening is something that it's almost like we're filling in a gap that got missed, and giving people the power to look at that for themselves and to guide themselves and to support themselves and to understand why it makes sense. So that we're kind of, I think, bringing together, well, look, you can prove for yourself that this is true and this is about as foundational as we can get. And you can see the qualities of it, this underlying happiness, peace, joy, freedom, love, compassion, however it shows up for them. That, I think, if you wanted to change the world, that would be the foundation of it. That would be the beginning of it. And so, whilst a lot of people did say, oh, there's no more space for another non-dual book, and people literally said that to me, it felt like that what Helen had seen and what I didn't even know I was doing, I was like, oh, this is the way to break that kind of seeking circle that can unwantedly and accidentally gather around a spiritual teacher, of people who love the energy of the room, but they have to go to that teacher to get that. And that 5, 10, 15 years later, when somebody asks them about their essential nature, they quote the teacher. They don't have their own words for it. And having your own words for it, having an articulation, having a logic that says this is how I got here, is what helps stabilize this understanding and stops it turning into some kind of breakdown, to be honest. So everything Helen said just made so much sense in terms of, oh, if there were to be a book about non-duality, this is the book I'd want my name behind.
Around that, Sara and Helen, I love the that approach, the process that you have in terms of the question that you're asking, and then a suggestion in terms of what that, and then moving into then looking at the experiment, and then the conclusion. So it really provides a nice map and a process in terms of here in that self-inquiry. What just to give any of the listeners some context, can we give me an example of that to talk us through that particular one of those? They've got so many in the book, which obviously then can provide that bit, that revealing and the deepening. So there's that recognition. Just to share that, I think will be helpful, and to hear, is there a favorite? Is there one that's like, ooh, yeah, this is the one that I'd if you were doing a webinar, Sara, this is one I'd play with the people that you're talking to.
And the ones I tend to play with most are probably the body-centric ones, because I used to teach massage therapists. I used to work with massage and Pilates in clinics, in offices, like not just my little home clinic. And so for me, I like to play with the idea of body, because so many people, especially people who've been on a spiritual path for a while, they tend to be a little bit disassociated from their body. It's like, oh yeah, I know. I have so many clients who've shown up and said, oh, I know I'm not my body. And a little voice somewhere in my ear says, oh, okay, let's put them in their body. Because we can't exclude it. It can't be, it's all awareness plus that body that I hate that's somewhere over there. But I know it's not me, because that's such a dual expression, and people don't mean to be dual about it. But until our experience of the body is our experience of ourself, until the body is not a container or a limitation, but just one way of experiencing, we're kind of always going to be slightly at war with ourselves, because we can't have whatever it is. And the body is one example. Some people have it with a particular boss or relative. Oh, everything's awareness and everything's perfect apart from my sister, and she's a nightmare. I've heard, those kinds of things. It's like, so the body is a great way of doing that. And one of the simplest ones for me was just like going beyond the visual perception of the body. So simply looking, and this is something that actually I first heard from Ellen Emmett, who's married to Rupert Spira, but is a fantastic non-dual teacher in her own field and very integrated with working with the body. And she just said, well, when you don't love your body as though it were the thing you love the most in the world, you just look at it. Just take the time to stop seeing all the labels and judgments and descriptions, and to kind of, it's an amazing thing that happens is if you put the time into that, you actually lose all sense of arms and legs and noses and ears, and it stops being, oh, I'm looking a bit fat, oh, I don't like that wrinkle, oh, well, that's a weird shape, and it just becomes like the stops being edges, and the lack of edge in our deepest experience of body doesn't stop us being functional. It actually enables us to be more functional because we're not trying to start with a body that we don't have. If I'm waiting to be slim and blonde and elegant in how I move, I'm going to be living a very different life to knowing, well, I start here. And that's actually true for everything in an experience. But I think for a lot of people, just the way they've been conditioned to relate to their body, whether to punish it or to use it or abuse it, instead of expressing who they know themselves to be as it, through it, with it. So for me, something that very simple look in a mirror until all sense of judgment, label, and discrimination just slide away is one of the things I probably play with most with people.
Yeah, thank you, Sara. That's beautiful. And Helen, what about you? What do you share in terms of that? Yeah, what sort of resonates with you in terms of these explorations?
Yeah, I think so. The thing that's come up to me that I want to share in relation to what Sara's just said is that something we've tried to do through the book is address the questions and the challenges that might come up from the mind, from our normal conditioning. So that's a great example that Sara's just shared, where I remember when I was first doing those kind of experiments, and the guided meditation or whatever would be saying to me, notice how there's no boundary between your body and the world. But my visual sense was so important to me. It looked to me like that was the most important and the highest order of sense that could be available. And I noticed how the mind would say, well, no, they're just getting you to imagine stuff. They're just getting you to make things up. That's not how it looks. You've got a body. You can see it right here. Of course, there's an edge. Look, you can see your skin, and then you can see where the skin stops and the air starts. So there's all that mind chatter would go on. And so what we've tried to do through the book, and thanks as well to the people who supported us in our development of it, we had a live book group, and we had independent readers whose challenges and questions also fed into the writing of it, because those kinds of questions do come up. The mind will challenge, the mind will resist, the mind will justify the position that's been taught all our lives. So that to me was so important, that that's what we've done to support each person's journey as best we can through a book. Obviously, we're not going to be able to capture every question that might come up, but as best we can, we've kind of pointed to, well, this might be coming up for you as a challenge or a question, and just helping the navigation of that, so that we stay as much as possible in what we're actually experiencing. And we talk about raw and direct experience in the book, because that's very different to the conceptual ideas of, well, yes, look, I see the skin and I see the air. When we come into the raw and direct experience, it's a completely different experience, and is actually what we're living in already. So hooking back to what Sara said at the very start, we're wanting people to live with reality as it is, and knowingly live with reality as it is. That's a huge part of that, to come out of ideas and into, well, no, how is it actually? What is it actually like?
Yeah. I love that. And what's that process of co-creating and writing that together? How was that as that unfolded? And I asked the question before we started recording about what's the juiciest thing you've done this year. It's like, we've just been writing this book.
Yeah, juicy enough. Yeah. It was a brilliant process from my perspective. It's genuinely fascinated me. I mean, talk about an expression of flow and ease and unfolding. To me, like, wow, could not have been more of that. So we started with, because it had begun with my idea and my collection of stuff, I began with a first draft of brain dump of, right, this is how I broadly think it's structured. These are the experiments I've collected so far. This is where I think they go, so first draft was kind of done around about this time next year. It was beginning of January 2022 when I started that first draft process. And then Sarah came in and did a review of that whole thing, bringing in experiments that she'd collected along the way and different quotes, and of course her own brilliant, what I've really valued about Sarah being in this with me together is that clarity of structure and the clarity of the arc of the whole book journey, as well as the arc of each chapter. And so Sarah came and did a whole review, and what we found was that we did this back and forth then of drafting and editing and writing a bit more and editing again, back and forth. And I remember you saying at one point, Sarah, in like ever decreasing circles, because having done that like big dump and then Sarah doing a big review, it was then smaller bits and smaller bits and smaller bits until we were like on this micro little edits of, oh, what about this one word? But yeah, I mean, to me it's been the best collaboration I've ever done in my whole life. Like, no question. And I think perhaps the basis we're both coming from might just have helped that. But yeah, Sarah, say a bit about what it was like for you.
Yeah, I don't think people really believe us that, like, Helen said, here's the first set of documents and this is the structure. And I probably said, yeah, but we'll need to swap those two and add this. And she said, yeah. And then I said, well, what are we going to do about this? And she said, yeah, but. And we did most of this in the comments on the side of a document, a shared document. So it'd be like, oh, I've been through section 1. Yeah, but really some of that's the introduction. True. And so there was like this, we say, we really need to restructure that whole chapter. Yeah, okay. Could go this, could go like that, or it could go a bit like that. And the whole thing was, it was remarkably easy. And you almost feel like you should lie about it being much more of a challenge or some sort of like traumatic process to birth this book. But it's more like a friendly game of ping pong or something, like, just like, when you're trying to keep the ball on the table as opposed to smash it and beat the other person up. And, I'd read one exploration Helen had written. I'd say, Helen, this is 5. You need to give yourself space to expand this. Or she'd say, Sarah, what the heck? What on earth is that you've just written? And like, we just went backwards and forwards, like not in a competitive way, but just in a, how do we make this the best? How do we make this really reflect what we know? And when we kind of like, we take it down a step, because I think when you deliberately write a book, which is very different from accidentally finding out you've got a book, you're kind of writing for your former self. When you accidentally write, you're very much writing your own journey. But we were having to like put ourselves back. And it was really odd, because I think that was probably the time Helen came to talk to me, was I'd literally just written a story, which is something I do, about somebody who deliberately put themselves back to the far side of a very difficult river on a daily basis to show more people the way across it. And I think that's what you do, is you have to kind of step out of what you know and almost rediscover it in order to share it in a way that's inviting, informative, and compassionate.
Mm. Yeah, Sarah, and there's what there's that sharing, isn't it, from that freshness, that rawness, without that, the story, the label. You've talked to that, isn't it? It's how can we meet life like with our full presence. So writing a book with your full presence, with that freshness and rawness as it comes to it. And it's when as I was reading it and just dropping into presence. I was really enjoying it. So thank you for creating it.
You're welcome. Yeah, as Sarah was saying that, it occurred to me that the reason the process, I think, part of the reason it went so easily is because what you just said, Sarah, about our attention was on how do we make this book the best it can be for our former selves, for whoever reads it. It wasn't about how can we look really impressive through this process, how can we be seen as special in some way. It was never about that. It's always been about the book from the very beginning. And I think that's also what therefore enabled that healthy back and forth, because our attention was on the love of the book, and it was always about how do we express this, as clearly, as openly, as lovingly as we can, even if that was just a background knowing it. I didn't have that in my conscious awareness, but I can see how that was really what was guiding the whole process.
And tell me, it's lovely as part of the process of creation. You were doing live book groups as well, and getting feedback and questions, which were helping refine. And share a little bit about the feedback and impact. I know you started some live book groups as well. Now it's published. Tell me a little bit about that. What you're hearing and seeing. In the community that's got their hands on it, and obviously there'll be more that will be hopefully receiving it for Christmas and having some time just to slow down and soften into it.
Yeah. So if I was to talk about the original live book group, it was interesting how there was uniqueness, of course, to each person's experience, but there was also a broad theme, where some of the part one experiments that required meditation brought up some challenges. So some people have come through a 3 principles understanding, where the idea has been collected, and it is an idea, it's not a truth, that I shouldn't meditate, that meditation is not required. I don't have to do that. So we talked about that, we explored that, and talked about the real purpose of meditation, and certainly the purpose of it in this book. We then had a little lump of resistance around chapter 6, which is when we explore the idea of being a separate self, which is completely understandable. We're going straight in there to at the beginning of part 2, which is the shift into what you're not. And so we start from that very core belief that that most people walk around with, that I'm a separate body and mind, and that's all I am. So understandably there was some challenge around that stage. And then also there was consistency at the end of the book, where there was just this, in fact, one of the readers said it's like clicking your seatbelt into place. It was like, it makes so much sense, like that logic that Sarah's talked about earlier, of the giving the mind the logic that allows it to align with what's already been felt in the body or as our being. It's like, there's a settledness, there was an okayness. There was equally some people who were going, I'm still not entirely sure what I've seen, but I can see that I've now got a book here that I can refer back to at any point and check back in with an experiment at any point. You've given me the experiments, you've given me the questions, you've given me what I need. So even if somebody ended the chapter, the final chapter, saying, I feel like there's something, but I don't know what, there's the confidence, the comfort, the knowing that they've got what they need. And then equally, we met with them again, didn't we, Sarah, about 4 to 6 weeks afterwards. And consistently, everybody was saying the level of okayness with whatever was happening in life was just fundamentally different. Everybody had this sense of settledness. And there'd been some quite challenging personal experiences in that time. It wasn't like they were all, floating through life, not meeting with resistance or challenges or issues. There'd been some big stuff happening for people, and still they felt this okayness. So yeah, that's really that's God, Sarah, could we ask for any more than that? I don't know what else you would add from that feedback stuff.
Yeah, and I think you talked about it at the workshop in a book, which is actually something that came out at the first book group. One of them said, "This is a workshop." I was like, well, yeah, it is definitely a set of workshops here. And the thing is, like, if you're running a retreat, which is something I love to do, like, there's the point where, because you've got this duration, you can unsettle to a certain extent. You can challenge some of the deepest held conceptions people have about themselves, because it's actually really common in spiritual seeking that the first thing that happens when the glimpses of awakening come in, it's like, oh, this is amazing. There's this all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful awareness, and me, this ego, this mind and body, I'm that. And that's where a lot of spiritual teachers can go a little bit off the rails, because they start to think, I, this person, am God, and I can do no wrong. Therefore, whatever occurs to me to do must be divine, because I am divine. And it can lead to all kinds of complications and confusions. So I think that we did what would happen in a retreat or in a big workshop, is we gave a very solid, secure sense of, you are this, or we are this, and you've proved it for yourself. But now we've got that base. We've got to remove what isn't you. So to avoid that, to start. And I know we've said, yes, this is the awakening process, and then there's the enlightenment process, which can be before or after, wrapped around. But part of enlightenment is the seeing more and more of what we're not. And so the awakening journey has to include a dropping away, either before or after, of what we're not, and re-understanding what we thought we were in a new light. And that's not always comfortable, because as humans, we love a story. We love, this is how it is, and this is what makes me safe. And to try to change that story, we are actually asking a lot of people to do that, but we're creating a space where it's safe to do it, where there's a secure foundation, so there's something to fall back on. It's not like the traditional launch yourself off a cliff and find out if you can fly thing. We're actually already saying, look, we've got who you are. And it was fascinating to watch that journey through the book with the first book group, and this was draft 1. It was really early days, but to see the people who felt that they were coming in as subject experts to help us, and the people who kind of kept saying, oh, I'm not really sure I should be here, I don't think I know enough, and the people who really wanted to help with our spelling and grammar, which, to be fair, there probably are still bits of grammar that I could do with some help with. But it's really fascinating to see how resistance throws itself up, how this challenge to who we think we are can come up in the most reasonable excuses. And I think that the book created that space and that flow that let people get kind of quite cross with us. And again, that comes back to we didn't need to be seen as gurus or specialists, just as people who had probably from this wonderful weird combination of backgrounds, a way of sharing that journey that had some universal element. So yeah, I think allowing that space where they're allowed to be cross with us at certain points in the book group or in the book, and then come to that point at the end. And one of the guys said something like, I'm not sure I have the answers, but I definitely know how to ask the questions now. But he was still reporting feeling happier, feeling more at ease, dealing with stuff in life that he'd maybe been avoiding. And I think that it's a wonderful thing to say, this hasn't given me answers, this has given me the ability to ask questions. Because then you carry on exploring. You don't say, oh, I've done the awakening, now what's next? You start to see all of life as part of that process. Yeah.
So there's that curiosity in what you shared earlier, Sarah, around the why, isn't it? That deepening and opening and softening. Beautiful. Love that. And I also love how, there's obviously the book, but you've also provided resources around to support that. So following it being published, there's live book groups, you've got a self-study course, there's opportunities to reach out to the two of you to ask questions as well and work with you. And how's that been? What else have you got sort of bubbling when we come into next year? What's sort of percolating? I know you sort of teasing about, there's going to be the second book that you're going to obviously tell you enjoyed working with each other. You're going to keep that going. But what's got you excited and feeling really alive for next year around how that's going to unfold?
Yeah, I think all of that. I will just highlight there's a resource in those free resources. There are audios to go with some of the explorations, and the quiz that we invite people to complete early at the beginning and the end of the book. Because not everybody, I've realised not everybody clocks that that's available, and also a companion journal, so that we found particularly for people who buy the Kindle have liked having the journal, which takes you through the same structure, gives you space to capture your own reflections, and really just support that journey in that physical way, which Kindle is brilliant, but it just can't provide. But yeah, so another thing for next year, definitely looking forward to everything you've already said, James, and we've also mooted the idea of having a retreat. So that may well be happening back end of next year, as well as, like you say, coming on to begin to think about the Enlightenment book. But yeah, it feels like there's so much richness available in this first book. We've not even talked about this, Sarah, but it feels to me it's important to give this one its space and give it some time to be in the world, and to not rush into book two. I've just had this thought come to mind. It's a bit like, you've had your first child and it's like they've got to a vaguely easy stage. I personally did this, like, right, it's time to have the next one then. And my husband was like, no, let's just,
because I think there is
one for a while.
There is a line in the book, I think, where you sort of say that you might be reading this and there's already the other books available, and I was like, oh, how are they? Yeah, they sort of started, or have they?
No, we haven't yet. We had a brief chat, didn't we, Sarah, at one point when something else had gone quiet, so we were starting to float some ideas. But yeah, I mean, for sure, we both really want to write that, don't we? It's actually something people will often refer to as awakening. That what we're going to write about is enlightenment. It often gets termed awakening. To me, it's really important. These phrases, these definitions we have really helped me to clarify what is it I'm doing and why am I doing it. And so that it does really matter to me that we complete this journey of both aspects of the exploration.
And just, Helen, talk for the listeners, just talk a little bit more about that in terms of just to open that. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, so in terms of enlightenment and how that is different. Yeah, so to me, the enlightenment is the lightening of our psychological conditioning. So if I've picked up a belief that says I'm only safe if I get everything perfect, which was one of mine, then I'm going to find myself working blooming hard and trying to do everything gold star standard in order to be safe. And so although with an awakening you come to know where safety really is, which is your essential nature, the mind can still be in that old pattern of, but I must do it perfectly, I must do it perfectly, I must do it perfectly. And so we sometimes need to actively look at those stories and understand them and see them, perhaps understand the logic as to why it's there, and the logic of whichever adult gave us that story or we picked up from them, whatever the circumstances are. So there's a huge plethora of stuff in the world. Basically, most self-development is still tightly psychological conditioning, in all different ways, in all different facets. And so it's going to be quite a different book in that, because there is such a wide range of things. We will be providing some kind of structure that shows these are the kinds of enlightenment stuff you can do. Really, it's all doing the same job. It's all lightening your psychological conditioning. It's all, realigning that with what you know about your essential nature. But the way you do it, what people are drawn to, the different approaches, techniques, tools, oh God, there is a myriad. So we're definitely not going to be writing about every single possible enlightenment tool or technique available. But yeah, that's the general intention of it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and that's important, that the awakening is like this really simple, it's a process, but essentially you're saying who you truly are. And that doesn't mean who you are as a person, as Helen's already said. It means who you truly are at essence in direct experience. And that's very, very simple. And the enlightening process is the myriad of paths, the pick and mix buffet. It's and a lot of people mistake one for the other. So they'll say, oh, but there's so many ways of awakening. And it's like, well, there's only one. There's many enlightening religious, spiritual, practical, psychological, philosophical traditions that may bring you to that one way or another. And that includes the ancient spiritual non-dual traditions. But there's only one point there. It's either to some level what reality is and who you are, or you don't. But the enlightening process can begin before, can carry on after. And a lot of people even say, oh, but if you know who you are, then everything else is, well, that's it. All your conditioning will melt away. And that's a bit like if you had a ceiling fan and you turn the power off over here, it takes quite a while just for the little light to go off. And then even with air friction, it takes a long time for that fan to stop spinning. And we don't really want people to wait all that time to enjoy life. It's like, well, it's kind of nice to start enjoying it now. And by enjoying, I mean engaging fully. So the enlightening part of the enlightening process is the friction on the fan that says, let's actually tackle the things that are like a thorn in your side, that are keeping you awake at night, that all those things, just to be really honest, that this is our normal experience, and that the awakening process will sometimes throw more light on them, but we won't know what to do with them. And to start to look at, so the book of Enlightenment will be very different to the book of Awakening, because it has to be.
Yummy, Sarah. I love the pick and mix buffet, and yes, and the analogy of the fan, to establish, to stabilize ourselves in that recognition, and then we're free to express ourselves with that love and understanding in the world, aren't we? So yeah.
Beautiful.
Can I know we're coming up to time. It's been so beautiful talking to you both. Can I ask, so would you be happy to read a poem from Quintessence? I'd love to hear one of those, which will be lovely to sort of finish with.
And Quintessence is the book I wrote by accident. I genuinely didn't know I'd written a book, which is by far the easiest way of doing it, but not the most intentional. And oddly, I opened the book right at the beginning on this page, and it sort of reflects a lot of what we've been talking about. So, which I love. Things tend to happen that way. So this one's called "The Fire Burns." The fire burns bright and shadows dance. The dancing shadows just a pale reflection of the flame. If not for the fire, there'd be no shadows. There are no answers in the shadows, however enticing the patterns. Shadows no more than the absence of light. Look to the flame, not for answers, but because there's nowhere else to look. The fire burns bright, the shadows subside.
That's beautiful, Sarah. Thank you.
You know, the funniest thing is it doesn't feel like I wrote them because, like I say, this is an accidental book. So a lot of it was me trying to find an expression for what I was learning about myself. So it's been it's been a completely different experience because the Awakening book and the journal were very intentional, and Quintessence kind of almost, it still feels a bit weird that people have read it. But I know that it's become part of people's enlightenment journey because people read them and feel a little bit better about themselves, which is kind of fascinating. Even people who've been having a really hard time, who I never thought would even be interested in the book. I know one person who'd been in bed for about 3 weeks, and they got out of bed to read their sister one of my poems, which was amazingly weird. And poems have been read at weddings, and I didn't even think I was a poet at all. So it's been a very interesting journey. In fact, I used to say to my friends, I'm a reader, not a writer. And the first book, I could kind of excuse it, but I think Helen's put me in a position now where I probably have to say I'm a writer.
Yeah, I think you said quite early on, I just write short things and poems. I'm not a proper writer. It's like, yeah. Along with the little book of Awakening turning into the complete book, we can definitely say Sarah's belief of I'm not a writer can be, we'll put that one to bed.
But you know, the writing of the book is very like the actual awakening process. It's like there's an arc to the whole thing, and then there's mini arcs, and then there's arcs within arcs, and the whole spiral experience. And I think our first book group showed us that, like our pre-publication first book group. I think I'm calling them book group 0 now. They showed us that it is that there's journeys within journeys and cycles within cycles, and there's a simplicity, but there's no easy answers. And I think we're kind of looking forward to, we're about a third full on the next, the first official live book group. And we're really looking forward to going through that again with them, because there's something for everybody. It doesn't matter how long you've been in some kind of non-dual understanding or how long you haven't. There's something for everybody in putting the time into that process. And I think it doesn't necessarily bring, for me anyway, major ahas, but it does bring like oh, that's a new way of. And I think however excited we are about the idea of writing about enlightenment, I think we do kind of really want to enjoy this book group and getting people going with the self-study program, which is almost ready to start, and those things, so that we can see, so we can see the impact of it, so we can see the intentions starting to roll outwards.
Yeah, a nice ripple turning into a wave. As that spreads. Thank you so much, Sarah and Helen. It's been magical sharing some time with you. And I'll you shared some beautiful music tracks, so I'm going to obviously mix those into some of the transitions and share both a video audio dialogue only, and then there'll be one with some accompanying music that's mixed in, as well as a little bit of a soundscape. So we'll work on that over the next week, and then get that out. And I look forward to staying in touch in the new year. And I really thank you so much for your time and sharing. It's been quite wonderful.
Thank you, James. Thank you for having us. It's been wonderful to see you.
Thank you for the conversation.